Hey, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the 73rd Comic Art Live chat. It's a fine evening, and I don't even get to be the lead speaker tonight because we've got a really fun, interesting chat. I think I kind of got this thing started about a month ago when I made some comments about who my top five X-Men artists were, and after that happened, we kind of I got emailed by Jason and Larry, and they said maybe we should turn this into something a little bit more fun and interesting, pitting X-Men fans against one another to figure out who are their top five picks and justify those things. So that's why we're here today. So Tatiana has not arrived yet. She's going to be our fourth, but I'm going to bring in Larry and Jason. Hey guys.
Hey, how are you?
I am fantastic. How about yourselves?
Ready to talk X-Men art?
Hey man, I've been waiting for this for weeks. I've been heavily promoting this on CAF.
Thank you for noticing the haircut, Jill. I did it especially for tonight because I know there might be some hair pulling, there might be some slapping going on, but either way, we've got a fun show. We've kind of gone over the numbers, so we know where everything stands. But we're looking forward to getting everyone else's opinions too. Feel free when we talk about a top five picks, as I see Dino has already thrown several of his in there as well. So yeah. That's what this show is all about. And if it goes well, we'll do similar topics to this in the future. Batman was said that we might try, or we might even switch it around and do artists as our topics. But as far as tonight goes, Jason and Larry, how about we talk about how we've structured tonight's debate?
Yeah, sure. We can do that. So we had to put some kind of parameters around it, right? If we talk X-Men artists, if you just said someone who drew the X-Men in any title, you could basically pick any artist in the comic world. So what we did is we kind of made qualifications here. We looked at the two main original volumes of X-Men, Uncanny X-Men, which started in 1963, and then the X-Men Volume 2, which was the Jim Lee book that started in 91, I believe, right? And the qualifications to be considered for the greatest X-Men artist was you had to have 3 consecutive issues credited as the penciler. So that kind of narrowed the names down and gave us some structure so we could all be picking from the same list. So each of us went and chose our top 5 artists from that list, and I think we're going to show you that list in a minute, so hold tight there. You'll be able to see everyone that qualified. But we each went and picked our top 5 artists from that, and we're going to talk about why today, and then we also ranked them 1 through 5. So then we did assign a point system to everything so that we can take the 4 panelists, look at the top 5s, give them a point ranking, and come up with who is the greatest ever. So that's going to be the culmination of this. So that there we go. Larry, you want to move on to the next one and talk a little bit about the qualifiers, right? There are your list of the X artist contenders. You can see it's a who's who of artists, right? X-Men always had some of the top artists in the field. They jumped on and off. You can look at the 2 lists there. It goes from Kirby through Dodson was the last artist on the Uncanny run, and then Lee obviously kicked that off, and we end with Lionel Francis Yu. So now you kind of understand the structure of what we're going to do, and we're going to let everybody take turns talking about theirs, and then we're going to probably have some friendly debate about these lists.
Agreed. Welcome, Tatiana. Nice to have you on board.
Hey, thanks for having me.
We're going to let Bill kick this off. So,
yeah, I get to go first. So
you started this mess, Bill.
I did. So my picks did change a bit from the time that I was on during the CAF update and had my list. I think I probably would have had Frank Quitely as my number 5. And, as I've kind of teased and talked about throughout, the past couple of weeks about this show, I think there's a lot of ways you can approach your favorite title and how, then your favorite artist as well within that title, right? I mean, a lot of that is nostalgia, or you can be thinking about them as their pure talent, to make this list, or their contributions to the books at large, right? So that was the challenge we all pretty much faced. I imagine maybe some of the other panelists approached it differently, but I tried to think about all those things. But again, I would have put Quitely as my number 5 if Quitely wasn't a choice. So when I got to number 5 was my hardest pick of all, to be quite honest, because I had about I really had two or three people that I was waffling with, and I ended up picking Jim Lee. And I know I'd said Jim Lee would not have been on my top 5 when we talked about this on the CAF update. But the more I looked at the list and I thought about Jim's contributions to the X-Men when he was on Uncanny to when he helped relaunch X-Men 1, I just felt like his overall contribution to the title, to the characters, was warranted being in my top 5. Whereas prior to that, I probably would have left him out. And maybe he could have been down as far as 7 or 8, to be quite honest, because the other thing that I mentioned to the panelists the other day was, I really started reading X-Men around and buying it off the shelves around issue 125. So, I'm coming in right in the middle of the Byrne run, and I stopped buying X-Men when I was a sophomore in college. So probably around 88 or 89. I mean, I literally missed everything that Jim Lee did, except reading it after the fact. So I didn't start buying books again until the late 90s. So, I mean, Jim Lee's contributions at the time of buying him off the shelves and being nostalgia for me wouldn't have, just didn't mean anything. But when I compared him, to the rest of the list and my picks, I felt that I would be a fool to leave Jim Lee off for that very reason. So that is why I felt he had to be a part of my top 5. So Chris Nork saying, "Way to go, Bill." So all right. So I've got a thumbs up from somebody in the audience. We didn't include the inkers on that, Goo. We were really just looking at the pencilers primarily. So, but that's my number 1, my number 5. Now, number 4 was kind of easy. I thought, Neal Adams was always, when I was first buying back issues with X-Men, the Neal Adams books were the ones that I really wanted to get and held off on for a while, because back then, even in the mid 80s, late 90s, when I was heavily collecting comics, the Neal Adams books were always a little bit pricier than anything before it or after it. But Neal's contribution to the comic, it's amazing that he put so much effort into it, and the book still went to reprints after all the work he did. So I've always been a huge fan, and I couldn't leave him off the top 5 simply because he's an incredible artist, and he had a lot of sway and power, and he tackled a book that by and large was on its way out the door, and still was on its way out the door after he was done with it. So Neal's just a great artist, and I knew for sure that he would be in my top 5. And so, but he falls number 4 in my list. And as you can see on there, I did pick a piece from Comic Link, only because I wasn't sure how big the image we were going to show during here. Comic Link had a rather large scan. It was just amazing how many Neal Adams X-Men pieces are on CAF, and they're all really small scans. I don't know if you guys noticed that too, but when I was trying to pick pieces to showcase, I was really disappointed that there weren't a lot of large scans of Neal's X-Men art on CAF.
Hey, Bill, can I pick on you for a little bit for this one, or what?
Yeah, absolutely. Please do.
So I absolutely love Neal Adams, right? But when I think of Neal Adams, I think of a lot of other stories, other characters before I think of the X-Men, right? And
Sure.
I'm a fan of the X-Men run. Actually, it's the first Silver Age art I liked as a kid, reading it in reprints. But I just didn't see, the depth of storytelling, right? So what from Neal Adams X-Men run is that memorable that it got you into the top 5?
For me, it's the art. I mean, so if my and I should maybe preface it like that. My Jim Lee pick was because of his contribution to the book. My Neal Adams pick is literally because of his art and the time period that he did it, right? Because that's probably this era in Neal's work is probably everybody's most favorite, I would think. I mean, I love Neal's work today, but here was like one of the greatest talents of his time in a pivotal moment, and he worked on X-Men. And even though it was a limited time period, I've always been a huge fan of Neal's work during this time period, and I think it was a great gift to have him on X-Men, being with X-Men being my favorite title, even with Thor. So that's all. So this was a pure artistic pick for me as the top 5 greatest X-Men artists for me. Neal Adams fits that bill.
Bill, I have a question. So how did you find Neal Adams X-Men? Like when I was growing up, obviously this is the 90s. I had to go Neal Adams in the back issues, and I didn't have $20 when I was a kid, to buy a back issue of Neal Adams.
Right. Well,
reprinting them. If it was above like $2, I couldn't really afford it. So,
Right. Well, you figure I started, my first creation con was probably 1982. And so you always see these. They're on the back walls. They're there. I'm buying the Overstreet guide,
Mhm.
and I'm always seeing that little set of Neal Adams, in the run where they're 3 or 4 times what everything else is, below it, and 20 times the reprints above it. So they were always, these mystical books that when I was collecting at the age of 15 and 16, I couldn't afford, always wanted, knew they were important. Clearly other collectors of the books knew they were important and priced them such, but so that's all. It just fits in that,
they were just
spot.
They were just inaccessible to me as a kid, so I don't really have much nostalgia, but I'll never question the beauty of his artwork, though. I mean, this is gorgeous.
No, I'm there with you, Larry. I didn't read any of these until I was an adult, until I was able to get them in reprints and trades and stuff like that. Yeah, same thing. This was a book on a wall that I could never even consider buying.
Right. It took me a long time too to actually buy them. I think I probably got from 13 up to issue 50 long before I bought the Neal Adams books, because I just couldn't afford it or couldn't justify. Back then, maybe a Neal Adams book was, $8 to $15 depending on the condition, and I could buy any other, book in the same quality before that for a third or half that. So yeah, they were probably the last books that I filled, and I guarantee, in my collection, I guarantee they weren't high grade comics at all. And I was never a high grade collector back in the day. So I think I still got the books in I was thinking about digging through the one X-Men long box I have. I didn't before I had this before the show tonight, but yeah, that's all. So it's just because I've always appreciated his art during that time, and I do think it was a gift to all of us that he was able to work on the book for a little bit of time.
All right, let's go.
All right. So oh, so a choice that Jason agrees with. Oh, so this is Paul Smith, of course, and I could have, Paul, for me, Paul Smith came. I was disappointed when Dave Cockrum left the book. Paul Smith was an interesting choice. I didn't know much about him at the time, but I loved his pencils. I loved Bob's inks on most of his. I don't know if it was the whole run or whatnot, but but I just loved his style. When I looked at it originally, it felt I don't know, had a bit of an anime feel, something that I wasn't used to seeing in comics, and it worked well with the X-Men as a title. I mean, we actually had a debate about our 5 least favorite X-Men artists the other day as well when we were chatting about this show. And so there's certain styles that work well with the X-Men books, and there's certain styles that don't. And Paul Smith was like the style we would never have thought of looking for, because we didn't know we needed it. But when it came on, I mean, it was amazing. I mean, it was, as much as I love Cockrum, seeing Paul's work on X-Men just blew my mind. I mean, it came out so far out of left field. I wasn't looking for it, and it was amazing, the whole experience of it. And I was so disappointed he didn't work on it for longer. So it's very easy for me to keep Paul. And again, I'm buying the books off the shelf at this time. And I think as a lot of other collectors, I think I was buying 2 copies of a lot of the Paul Smith books just because I loved them. One I was slipping it into a bag, and the other one I was reading, but again, the storytelling for those issues were great. And Paul Smith, his artwork is really what was even better than Claremont's writing at that time. So, just again, you look at the issue on the one on the left. I mean, the Morlock storyline that Paul Smith got to worked on, just amazing. I mean, it was just great. It was these pivotal changes in the book that after Byrne and Cockrum, there were stories that just grounded them in a different way. And even here with Cyclops and his father, I mean, at the end of the day, they were just things that Paul Smith had a great way of telling those subtle moments. We talked about Paul's work with Kitty and Colossus and stuff. The developing relationship between them. I mean, he was a great artist to be tackling some of those topics and things. So and again, so this is from an artistic standpoint and also from a nostalgic standpoint for me, because it was really an important time for me reading X-Books.
All right.
No debating from anybody. We're all thumbs up on this one. You're debating on this one, my John Byrne pick for number 2.
I love Byrne. I'll talk about Byrne for days. So go ahead. I'll let you.
All right. Well, I mean, this is just an easy one. I mean, for me, this period with John Byrne, with Austin inking him most of the time, I mean, it's just, again, it's a period I think most collectors really appreciate. I actually like the early Byrne artwork more than I like the later Byrne, just because there's something softer about the style, subtler. It's not as crisp and tight, as maybe the later issues with I don't know, like any of the even the Death of Phoenix, around that time period, it's a very different style. So I've always had an appreciation for the early Byrne artwork. So this to me is, I mean, it kind of checks all the boxes, from nostalgia to his artistic talent to his contribution to the book. Again, I think just like Neal Adams was a gift before Uncanny, John Byrne was, our gift to kind of get things started. I mean, it's unfortunate that Cockrum's start wasn't as fantastic as probably everybody would have hoped, and so Byrne came in. But I mean, Byrne was a perfect fit for the book, and he made it. He made it an exciting read just from his artwork alone. I mean, how many of us didn't want to draw like John Byrne? So who were aspiring artists? I mean, I
Phil,
ate him and Perez all the time.
This is your nostalgia home, right? This is the true nostalgia for your Byrne, right? So
right.
What is your favorite story? Byrne arc, Byrne story,
Probably the I mean, when they were in the Savage Land, that was probably one of my more favorite arcs. And I read that after the fact, because like I said, I started reading, off the shelf around 125 to 127. So I was coming in around Proteus. But but as far as the art and the story, I've always liked Savage Land, and that's kind of why I picked that cover, because it's always been one of my favorite arcs. I mean, it was cool, and I wish I could be highlighting the chat while I'm speaking so much. I can't read and talk at the same time, clearly. But no, unfortunately, only I can. I should have extended admin rights to everybody, and then we all could have been. But there you go. Dino says Hellfire Club, Wolverine alone was his number one. Yep.
So Bill, I have to ask you, because you were picking these off the shelves, and I guess doing the heart of the whole Dark Phoenix run and everything. How did it feel like waiting for a month for the next issue? Like I read it all in one trade paperback, so I don't know the feeling of, okay, gotta wait the next month for the next issue. This is so exciting.
Right. No, it was painful. I mean, but the thing is that even back then, we weren't expecting Jean Grey to die. I mean, that was that was the the thing that really shocked everybody. I mean, I think everybody. I was sad. It was a turning point in comics for me. After at any rate, yes, it was a difficult moment. And I see everybody's picking out the Hellfire Club and everything leading up to that. Bill, are you just going on most comments on CAF, or are these are my picks, James? Most comments is my Thursday show.
Bill, can you highlight Mark Fong's comment a little bit up? I think he might have missed the beginning. I don't want to see. Yeah, okay. We're not blaming Michael Golden or Art Adams. I think all four of us would tell you we love those artists, but we had specific qualifications about what could fall into this category, and neither of them ever penciled 3 consecutive issues in either title. So more, not an oversight. Just want to make sure that's clear in case anybody else joined late and it is not understanding why we don't have certain artists on here.
Yeah, the list would have been really different if it had been, anybody who had ever worked on an X-Men book, for sure.
Right. So we were looking for like consistency and somewhat contribution, and that's how the list was set up. But yes, Byrne is my number 2, and sure, of course, the whole Phoenix, Death of Phoenix storyline between Hellfire Club up until her death were, it was great reading, but for me, that Savage Land, what led to them getting into the Savage Land from battling Magneto, I mean, that was just great storytelling. And again, I was reading it after the fact, but for me, those, again, that his art style then, because I even go back and you look at the books from that time, they weren't printed really well, and it looked kind of I don't know. It's hard to describe, but kind of fudgy looking, blacks as far as those issues around 112 to 114 of just that time period in comics. But you go back and you look at the originals, and they're just so beautiful. And again, I look at that image on the left where it's not John Byrne drawing Fantastic Four, right? I mean, the way he inked himself and the way he ended his X-Men run. This is more subtle, more soft, and that's the style of Byrne that I like the most.
Yeah. Hey, Bill, before you get to number one, why don't the audience try to guess who your number one is? Let's give them a few minutes. But you're talking about John Byrne, but I want to hear what the audience may guess is your number one.
Oh, come on. They got to know who my number one is. But yeah, John, I don't know. What else can I say about John? I mean, to me, like I said, I really, when I wanted to be a comic illustrator when I was this age too. So I was definitely going over, the Savage Land stuff. That's how I learned to draw landscapes, drawing funky vines with little mushrooms on them. And he would draw a mountain and he would just put a bunch of lines on it to kind of represent shadow and stuff. And so there's a lot of good picks in there. So again, he just had a unique way of doing things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We do like Churchill art.
I do. My first published piece of original comic art was by Ian Churchill from X-Men. Yes.
All right. So now we're going to your number one. Vote.
There you go, everybody. There. How could it not be Dave Cockrum, right?
What a shocker! I just can't believe it.
So there you go. So remember, I started reading around 127 or so, and so I hadn't really seen the Cockrum issues before that. But after Byrne, of course, went right into Dave Cockrum, and I just, you look at it and say, wow, it was such an amateurish, you're replacing Byrne with Cockrum. How is that going to work? But I just love Cockrum's style. I mean, that's why I picked the piece from, I don't even remember what issue that is on the right. Somebody will tell me, but Cockrum is a homer pick. Thank you, Jason. You can criticize me, right here too. But anyways, so again, it goes back to Cockrum. Someone said Cockrum laid the groundwork for Uncanny, and of course he did. And so I didn't really appreciate that at the time until I went back and read those, got the back issues before Byrne came along. But Dave's work, I mean, as everybody knows, he was great at designing costumes. He just had a fun way of drawing characters that, I've just always appreciated. And so this one's kind of a talent pick, but also a contribution pick, because I mean, it was his vision that helped shape what Uncanny became early on before Byrne came along. And then he picked up where Byrne left off. And I think that, and he really didn't miss a beat. The stories were still great. And, Cockrum's art was fantastic. I mean, I think, I owned a couple pages from I can't even think what issue number it is, where Wolverine was fighting the Brood on his own. I mean, those, and I had a couple of Wolverine pages from that, which are long gone, of course. But he was just great. It was in a different way than Paul Smith was with his storytelling and his approach. I mean, again, he was meant to be working on the X-Men. I mean, just from his his approach to drawing, and I think that for me, he's my number one. He'll always be my number one artist. So no one can ever replace him. And I know I saw, I'm sure James was wondering where Kubert is and all that stuff, or which Kubert is from my list. But you have to remember, I stopped reading during Kubert's both Kubert's work on the books primarily, and same thing with other people like Wills Portacio and whatnot. So for me, those guys, I have a hard time putting them in any list for me, because they're not they just don't resonate with me at all. I mean, the stories were good, but I read them after the fact. I mean, now I'm in my 30s and 40s, so my teenage self who was reading those other ones, it just doesn't feel the same. So there you have it. That's why I picked Dave.
Hey, so fun fact is, I was reading a Dave Cockrum interview earlier today. He said one of his biggest mistakes was leaving the X-Men book during his second run. He left it because so he can do his Futurians book. But by the time he received his first royalty check for Uncanny X-Men, he was already off the book. and he didn't realize how big that royalty check was. If he knew that his royalty checks were going to be that big, he would have stayed on the book. So I thought that was interesting.
I bet if you asked a lot of these artists that we're picking, Larry, what their biggest mistake was, it'd probably be leaving the X-Men title, right? Except for like Jim Lee, who went on to a different kind of fame, you know.
Right. And I see Christopher asked about Silvestri. I mean, Silvestri was kind of probably around the time period when I was stopped reading books. So he's not, I mean, I love his work, and I'd love to own a great example by Silvestri on X-Men. If anybody has one, please show me. I haven't seen one on the market in a very long time. But that's why Silvestri wasn't on my list. But again, I think, you know, my list was there, and as is. I saw somebody said no Jack Kirby. I won't give any spoilers out for the rest of this. But yeah, those are mine, and I stand by these picks. Very, you know, perfect. As long as Quitely's not on there, Jim Lee manages to break my top 5.
Yeah, as the audience is going to find out, I mean, trying to limit to 5, it's a hard cut, and all 5 of our lists are different. So, you know, you're going to be stunned who's going to be missing from somebody's list, but we're talking about 5, and then there's at least 10 good qualified artists. So, but how they rank them will be interesting.
Yes, exactly. All right. Well, I got mine out of the way. Oh, I knew going first would be good.
Now you get to pick on everybody else, Bill.
I will.
Well, let's just say, like Tatiana or Jason, do you have any feedback on Bill's picks?
Look, you can't go wrong, right? With anybody on any of our lists, you can't go wrong. It's subjective. You know, obviously, I have a couple. You'll see mine later, but a couple of Bills don't make it to my top 5, but that doesn't mean I don't love them, right? Yeah, I think Cockrum gets a lot of credit for the creation. I think that when you try and stack them, it doesn't hold up as well. But that's my opinion, right? And that's what this is all about, is having different opinions.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I completely agree. You know, Bill and I overlap by 1. And but I love every single artist on Bill's list, like immensely. Like I would be so over the moon to own, you know, X-Men pages from any of them. Nightcrawler is one of my favorite X-Men characters, so Dave Cockrum's always been really special to me, you know, for that reason. So just because somebody isn't in our top 5 doesn't mean that we don't respect them immensely, like their work or like their stories. It's just this was hard. Picking a top 5 was hard, and we all have different top 5s for different reasons. And I love Bill's reasons for his top 5 for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, I love your reasons. I mean, the Dave Cockrum pick of number 1. I mean, he laid the foundation for everything. So I really like that pick. So Bill, what would your number 6 or number 7 would be if you kept going?
Well, I mean, I'm gonna give you my number 6 later, I think, but my number 7 probably would have been, I don't know, probably would have been Silvestri, though. I'd be on the fence. I mean, I always loved. I always butcher, is it Bacalo? I always loved Chris's work, and I was really happy when he was working on X-Men, anything X-Men. So I probably would have put him in an even tie with Silvestri. But and I know, again, there's a lot of names being pushed down after that, right? John Romita Jr. and whatnot. So I think we're going to see some of those names later on.
Right. All right. The next person is going to be Tatiana.
So before I start my list, I wanted to say, you know, my reasoning for my choices. I based mine a lot on nostalgia. So I started reading X-Men when I was in junior high, which was in the mid-90s. So a very different time period from when Bill started reading X-Men. So I started reading it at a different time, and I'm also was coming at it from a very different perspective. You know, being a girl who read comics, you know, in that time period where we started seeing the X-Men cartoon, right? That was big in the mid 90s, and all of those things starting to pick up. So my perspective on choices is different. It's changed as I've gotten older, but I tried to just go with the nostalgia factor. And I'll explain those as I go through my choices. But this was hard. I definitely had 6 or 7 for sure that I really wanted to put in there, and trying to narrow it down was tough.
All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Maybe the audience can guess who your number 1 pick is in the meantime.
So this is my overlap with Bill, Paul Smith. So Paul's run on X-Men was way before I started reading X-Men, but when I finished when I graduated high school and was able to kind of go out and go to different shops in different areas, check out the back issue bins and trade paperbacks. Paul was one of the artists that definitely captured my attention. I absolutely love, and the reason I chose these 2 pages is because I love Paul's storytelling and kind of everyday life storytelling ability just as much as I love his, action sequence ability. One of the characters that I think Paul absolutely smashes is Shadowcat, as she was at the time. And just capturing her character really, really well. And so that's why I showed the picture of her and Peter here in this a little bit of their story together, which is something I always really, really liked. I think Paul does an amazing job with expressions. You can really feel the connection between Peter and Kitty. And I think that a lot of people aren't super great at that. And he's really good at that. You can tell the type of relationship they have, where they are at in their relationship on this page versus, kind of where they are decades later. So that's something I really love. And then also, on the action shots, you get a really good layouts here. You have the way the panels are laid out. I really, really like. The storytelling is nice, and you can really feel the flow of what's happening on the page. I always like the way he drew Nightcrawler and Wolverine as well. So this was a fun page to choose.
Well, I'm happy you picked, these kind of pages as well. I mean, that's what I went with, is because, you could pick nice splashes, some of his covers, but I always felt like his storytelling was top notch. And in a book where you have a lot of talking head pages, you really have to make it work. And he just always did. I mean, that's a big part about the X-Men books. It's just the conversations they're having around the X-Mansion, right? So at the end of the day, you gotta be able to tell a good story and make it convincing and keep it entertaining. And Paul definitely did.
Yeah, I say like the 2 moments of my favorite moments of like Paul Smith is one when Storm beat Callisto to win the Morlocks, to be the leader of the Morlocks.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of those like history changing moments, right? That's so embedded in Storm's history and her character and that entire run, him being able to tell that story. It was just so well done, with Storm having her issues with tight spaces and all that stuff, and how that was all brought into the story and how he characterized that was amazing.
Yeah. And I see you chose a page of Silver Samurai, and I also remember the fight that Wolverine had with Silver Samurai, and I thought that was a memorable page as well too. So
yeah, definitely.
All right, go to number 4.
All right, number 4. I saw Lori mention Wils's name earlier in the chat, so I was excited to see somebody else. I've been a big fan of Wills for a really long time. Wills is incredibly unique. No one draws like Wills. Wills is an incredible teacher of art. He has an incredible understanding of artwork. He's unique, but in a way where everything that he draws makes sense. That personalization in his style is much more obvious now than it was 30 years ago, but it's something that I've always noticed in his work. And so I tried also here to pull something a little more actiony and then something a little bit more of a storytelling page. The thing with Wills, the reason his work always stuck out to me in particular is the way that he drew Storm. Storm is so incredibly powerful under Wils's pencil, and Storm is always a powerful character, and so many artists have done a great job of drawing her, but something about the way Wills draws her, you see, if you look at the cover, that she's so fierce, that look on her face, that power in her body, but then you see the softness in the panel page with her and Forge. So the thing I loved so much about, this storyline in particular, I know, Johnny, I'd love to own this cover too, is you have the juxtaposition of a lot of her, conversations with Bishop, right? Bishop's a newer character in these stories. And then that softness and the relationship between her and Forge, which I always really, really liked as well. They were a couple that I always, wish had gotten back together. So yeah, I just don't think that anyone has quite captured Storm in the same way that Wills does. I mean, even if you look at her outfit, the way he draws the lines, the way he really encapsulates that weather, right? That you can feel that in that cover, that you can almost feel that electricity and that wind and that power in there. And it's the way he renders and the way he adds in some of his unique qualities that really makes that pop for sure.
Tatiana, I agree with you 100% on Wills' Storm. My issue with Wills, though, was always his inconsistency with anyone else. I think he loved Storm, and you could see it anytime he drew it. You're 100% correct. But I also saw the inconsistencies with other characters that maybe he didn't care about as much. And that was kind of a fault for me that knocked Wills out of the top 5.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. If you look at some of the other pages that are up, like there's a page on CAF that has Angel and a couple other characters on it, and like Storm looks super good, and some of the other characters don't look as good. But I think for me at the time, like I said, I was basing this on nostalgia, right? So being like 13, 14 years old, starting to get into reading these comic books, that really spoke to me. We have a strong woman of color who is bossing everyone around. She's this amazing character. And for me at the time, like I can notice those inconsistencies now, but at the time I didn't notice them at all because the character I was focused on was so well drawn. The story was so well done that none of the rest of that even mattered to me.
Yeah, and I think since most of us have been collecting it for a while, we've noticed that Wills has changed his style. Like what he draws now is nothing like what he drew back when he was doing X Factor or X-Men. And I know like during his Image days when Scott Williams was inking him, it looked really nice. But when he did X-Men, I always asked myself, art to bear, how much, like my love for Wills Portacio, how much did that have to do with art to bear? And I thought Art to Bear and Wilt, they worked well together. And so I was like, I like Wilt, but do I only like Wilt with Art to Bear inking over him? So I mean, I don't take anything away from him, but I think they played a really great combo.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Joe inked Wills on a lot, has inked Wills on a lot of stuff, and Wills is difficult to ink well. And I think that Art definitely brought a huge piece of that pie in Wils's success in his X books. Art really knew how to sculpt those lines and how to really pop what really mattered. And I 100% agree with you. I think the inker, some artists it matters more than others, but with somebody like Wills, the inker pairing makes a huge difference.
All right. We'll go ahead. Number 3.
So this one should not be a shocker to anybody who was listening when I said I started reading X-Men in the mid-90s. So when I came into reading X-Men was, Excalibur was out, and then it was like right before the Age of Apocalypse stuff. So the Age of Apocalypse stuff holds a very special place in my heart. And so, of course, this was right when Joe Mad was working on X stuff. And so his covers were so dynamic. As a 12 or 13-year-old, this is a piece that, I could notice this comic cover from across the room as I was walking down we didn't have a comic shop, but, walking down the magazine aisle at the BX on the military base where I lived. And, I got my $2 allowance or whatever it was that I got. So I could pick up a couple comic books a month. And I was so drawn in to his work. It's so that graphic quality. It was very, very nice, right? In that way, everything kind of felt big and bright, and I loved his. Well, he still does it now, but his ability to be able to draw things that are really serious and really funny on the same page. Like there's a page where it's Professor X, and they have Sabretooth kind of like chained up in the back, and he's all mad, and then like the last panel. Professor X is basically telling him to shut up, and Sabretooth is making this really silly face. And so it's just funny as you're reading through. It's so serious, and there's all these things going on, and then this funny face. And that always, as a kid, was always something that struck me. And then he's drawn so many characters I love. Blink is one of my favorite characters. So, when she was introduced for, Age of Apocalypse storyline. There's another artist we'll be talking about very soon who also worked on some Blink stuff. So that always stuck out to me. The character designs, the way he drew them. Gambit, I'm a huge Gambit fan. Absolutely love the way he draws Gambit. Super cool. He captures that darkness, but also that super cool guy factor with Gambit, which I always really like. So this is definitely like my number one, like nostalgic 90s kid pick of my top 5 for sure. But that will always hold a special place in my heart. I don't get shy very often. For those of you who've met me, I'm usually pretty outgoing and I like to meet new people. And I've met all sorts of celebrities and all sorts of people and have not gotten shy. But I was hanging out at the Aspen booth at an LA show like 15 years ago. And he was friends with Michael Turner. And so he was in the booth talking. And I knew Mike and everybody else at the Aspen booth, and I could have gone out to talk to him, but I totally freaked out. I totally had the fangirl, super shy, I can't go talk to him right now scenario. So clearly it's deep down in there somewhere that how much he influenced me as a young reader for sure.
Jason or Bill, I mean, what are your thoughts when you started? Well, Bill, you probably weren't picking up the book, but Jason, I mean, what was Joe Madureira's style like really shocking when you started like getting his books?
It was shocking in a good way. I mean, it was refreshing, I guess, after so long of darkness, right? The X-Men storylines and art was heavier for a while. Madureira coming on and kind of bringing it up definitely was a welcome thing. The only thing that, the reasons why Madureira didn't make my list, and I'm previewing my list, I guess, I never loved Madureira's costume designs, and nothing lasted from his run, right? When I think of other artists, you can pick and choose stuff that's relevant till today. Mm-hmm. Outside of the AOA stuff, which is more, but there was a lot of artists involved with that. Nothing, it was a lot of fluff. It was beautiful. It's pretty. It's great. It just didn't have the staying power of some other artists that I thought filled the list higher.
Okay. So Aranga's messaging me in the back end, so he's picking on me. So I like Joe, and when I was reading it, I mean, I thought it was cool. It's fine, but me personally, I think he's overrated. It's just like, I mean, I guess overrated in the sense that every page for anything that that goes in a market is like 5 figures, no matter what. It could be talking heads, 5 figures for everything like Joe touches. I think he's good, and I enjoyed the style. I mean, he had an anime style, and I was, when I was reading the book, I was into it. But but geez, I think of all the X-Men artists, like I can't believe people paid this much for his art. But I guess it's, I mean, part of it is rarity. But me personally, I think Joe may be a little overrated.
I mean, for me, I think it was very much about when I came into reading the books, right? I think that's a huge part of it. You walk in and you just started reading it, and this is on the shelf, and you're 13. Yeah. Like that's what did it for me. That's what the connector was. I used to have a really nice splash page of his as well, and somebody bugged me for years, and I finally sold it. And it's one of those pages I wish I had never sold, but really nice stuff.
Right. I missed this as well and bought them when I first started buying comics after I'd gotten married. So I don't know, I guess this would have been around 97. So I just missed Age of Apocalypse and the whole early 90s, chromium covers and all that crazy stuff. And I'm looking for X-Men and it was just like, man, all this Age of Apocalypse stuff is out there. And so that was my first, kind of viewing of Joe Mad's work, and I thought it was cool. I mean, I did, but it wasn't a sweet spot for me. I mean, I still do. I still like I like his work a lot. I'd love to own a page by him, but it's it's like everybody said, it's very rare to see any of his work on the market, which is why it costs so much. But I don't know. I mean, if you're a fan of AOA, I mean, I think it's and Tatiana, you picking it up off the shelves, I can see why it's a nostalgic pick. You kind of have to go with that.
All right.
So Ruben's asking what Maggot's powers are now.
Is he
His
still
powers
alive?
are gross if you don't know what his powers are. Like, that's why I said they're funny.
Yeah.
Like, they're gross. He literally, yeah, they're literally like these gross things on his body, and he throws them at bad guys. It's he's up there with like top 5 silly powers. Him and Stacy X, man.
ATX, yep.
So yeah, the splash page I had of Joe Mad was it was like an intro page with Blink. It was a full page splash.
Oh,
And it was yeah, that was a hard sell, but it was one of those, they kept offering me more and more and more money. So Ruben, Maggot's actually a super cool character. His powers are silly, but he's a super interesting character. They did later on, not during the Joe Mad run, but much later when they brought him back into the stories. They did more with his kind of his background story. And so he is an interesting character. And they did redeem him a little bit from having given him really, really silly powers.
Oh, you know what else they did silly? Who was that fake Magneto they introduced? What was his name?
Joseph
Yeah, Joseph.
Right. Yeah.
with the long hair.
Yeah.
Yep.
They've been doing some strange things with Magneto over the years that I did not like.
It was like Jesus Magneto. It was not cool.
Very true.
Yeah.
Oh,
All right. We'll go to your number 2.
So number 2 is one of so Alan Davis is just one of my favorite artists, period. And you can ask Larry knows. Larry knows how much I love Alan's work. I've loved Alan's work since I was a kid. I mean, I mentioned earlier Excalibur being on the stand. Obviously, that was Alan. And Alan's one of those artists who I can always rely on coming back around into the books I love. I saw that, Jason. Into the books that I love, because Alan has worked on X-Men over the years. You know, this is awesome. Like the piece I have on the left there is much later than the piece on the right. And so that's the thing that's great about Alan, is you can always count on him to kind of come back and draw the characters that you love. I chose the piece on the left because I have always loved X-Men baseball issues. I'm a big baseball fan. I've been a baseball fan my whole life, and I've always loved the storytelling and the fun stories that you can have in the baseball issues. I also have that piece up there because my friend Eric owns this piece. You all know Eric. And if Eric ever decides to sell this piece, Eric is going to sell it to me. Right, Eric? So I actually asked, he was selling a bunch of art a couple years ago, and I'm like, would you sell this one? He's, no, it would have to be like a ridiculous, and I get that, right? We all have those pieces, but of course it also has Nightcrawler, who's one of my favorites. So so that's why I picked that one. And then the piece on the right, the reason I chose that is one of the storylines I loved with Alan's art is like some of her introduction to Psylocke. So you have this whole issue where she's watching, Wolverine and Sabretooth fighting, and you're like, who is this character? And it's just really cool the way, I've always loved the way he draws Psylocke. Absolutely, yeah. The way he draws British Psylocke, like, he's such a great choice. And Psylocke's one of my other favorite characters in her kind of metamorphosis and stuff over the years. And I think he has done a really good job of capturing that. I think that his storytelling is really, really good. I love the way he captures characters, like the look on Nightcrawler's face in the baseball piece. And he's drawn so many of my favorite characters over the years that, if you tell me X-Men and like who comes to mind right away, he's definitely one of the first people that comes to my mind. As far as inkers go, everybody has their preferences for Mark. My favorite, or for Alan, my favorite inker on Alan is Mark Farmer. So Paul's a great inker for Alan too. Alan also inks himself, but Mark's always been my favorite inker choice for Alan. So if I have a choice on any given thing, I love seeing the two of them work together. I think they work really well together.
So Jason or Bill, what did you think about when you first picked up Uncanny X-Men 213? With the one with Wolverine and Sabretooth on the cover, and Wolverine's pretty much punching him in the face.
I thought it was awesome. Alan Davis isn't like top of my mind when I think about X-Men. Unfortunately, even though he's worked a lot, obviously, on X books, so it's so that's kind of unfortunate for me. But I love Alan. Is just he's an incredible talent. I have to say I actually prefer Neary's ink for Farmers, but I like them both. But I've always liked Neary's work too. So I don't know, Jason. This is again, this is probably more of a sweet spot for you, time wise, reading wise.
I love Alan Davis. I absolutely adore Alan Davis. I have a page from Excalibur 2 in front of me as we speak. Larry, you said about the 213 mutant. That's a mutant massacre. That was one of the greatest storylines of ever. That Sabretooth Wolverine battle is amazing. Psylocke's introduction in that book, it was mind blowing. I'll be honest with you. The first book I remember of Alan Davis with the X-Men is actually an annual, maybe 11 or so. It was this odd villain horde or something, and it was a real intricate story about like the weaknesses of the X-Men, so on and so forth. And that book, his art, where it started resonating to me and where I wanted to go find more. Tatiana, I support this pick 100%. And if this was an Excalibur story, it'd be number one artist for me.
Oh, yeah. I think to me, like, that's a hands down. Anybody who didn't say Alan Davis was the best Excalibur artist would have to be permanently fired.
Yeah, I agree.
That's what got me into Alan's stuff, was that Excalibur 1 issue, right?
Yeah.
And first of all, I loved the story and I loved the characters. But then it was like, this art is amazing. And like I said, I love Paul Neary's inks too. I just have a soft spot for Mark Farmer. But obviously, Paul inked a lot of that stuff. And it's absolutely beautiful. And so whenever I saw any other X-Men X titles that had his name on it, I always had to buy them. And I'm always happy when he comes back, because it's like every few years he's back and he does a storyline. And I just love it every time, because it's always a little different, right? It's later and later, so he doesn't draw exactly the same. And I just love every time he comes back to the book for a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, I'm a big fan of Alan Davis, and I have 20 pieces in my calf gallery. I mean, anything he touches. I mean, it's I think it's also easy for him to draw all that out. And he's always so humble. When all the other artists come up to him and say, "Oh, you're a big influence on me," he's like, "Okay, yeah." I mean, I'm not sure why, but all I do is just draw pictures. I mean, he's amazing. Yeah. So. All right, so we're going to get to your number one pick.
Can I commit one piece of blasphemy before we go? Sure. I've only read 2 Excalibur comic books in my life. My God. So he did nothing to me. Alan Davis did nothing to me. I've never read Excalibur, which I think has part of the influence. Yeah.
Hey, hold on, I got to go on eBay and buy Bill the first 20 issues.
Yeah. I mean, but again, when the Excalibur started in '88. And it went to around 98, right? So it is like right in that period where I stopped buying comics. So I missed it all. And I've only picked up a couple back issues because people have said, you should read this, but I haven't. Yeah, Chris Norris has come on, Bill. So there you have it. That would be probably why, Alan doesn't come to my mind as being an X creator, and has nothing to do with anything other than the fact that my own incompetence at reading.
I have written myself a note: buy Excalibur for Bill.
Hey, I've heard it's great. I've heard it's fantastic.
Really good.
Everybody's very passionate about it in the chat, I see.
Alan has drawn everything except probably Spider-Man and Superman. So you've definitely experienced his art everywhere else. So
true, I have. I really have. But all right.
And like Larry said, he's literally one of the nicest guys in comics. Like, he just is. Really looking forward to seeing him again at Como this year, because I haven't seen him probably in 6 or 7 years. So it'll be really nice to see him again.
Wow. All right. Doing your number one. Andy Kubert.
All right. So my number one's Andy Kubert. I feel like this is a pretty obvious choice for being a comic book X-Men fan in the 90s. There was a lot of great X-Men artists in the 90s, but I feel like Andy was really a standout when you're looking over that entire decade. He was in there for, how many issues did he do, guys? A lot.
Yeah, 50, about 40.
I think it's 50. I think he broke 50.
Well, I know his run went from 14 to 59, but with like an issue break here and there, filling issues here and there, but it's quite a huge number.
Yeah, and then he did some issues of Uncanny as well, didn't he?
Yep, he had some Uncannies too, exactly.
Yeah. So he was, I mean, if you liked X-Men in that decade, you had to like Andy Kubert. And he's just one of the first things, like when you think about 90s X-Men, right? He's one of the first artists that comes to mind. I feel like it's him and Jim are kind of like the two that you're going to think about. We think about that 90s era style X-Men. So when I think about Andy, I think about the whole team. And that's why the two pieces I picked here feature like team shots, because that's the one thing I always thought of from him, that those dynamic group poses. Again, I love Gambit, and so I may have picked a lot of pages accidentally that had Gambit on them. So you'll see, like, I like Psylocke. Oh, Psylocke's on a lot. I like Nightcrawler's on some stuff too. So, but it was just, I feel like he really represented what 90s X-Men were about. And then, and then that moved throughout the entire decade. And so there were so many different stories with so many different characters. And I think that his ability to draw emotion when it comes to action is really, really good. So any kind of overarching large storylines that you had, but there was a lot of stuff going on, he was always a really, really great choice. And I should explain to people who want to know why I just mentioned Jim and why Jim is not in my top 5. I love Jim Lee. I know Jim personally. I'm a huge Jim Lee fan. Huge Jim Lee fan. The reason I didn't choose Jim is because I asked myself, who are the first 5 artists that come to mind when you think about X-Men comics? And as much as I love Jim, he wasn't in that, because when I started reading X-Men, Jim was already done. And then when I went back and read older stuff, the stuff that captured my interest as a, 13, 14-year-old girl, was Paul Smith and were some of those other stories, right? Wilson stuff. And I think that Jim is an incredible artist. He's one of my favorite artists. My respect for him and his X-Men work has gone up a lot more over the years. And it was he was my number 6. So he's like, I had a really, really hard time and I had to make choices. And I felt like, well, a lot of other people are going to pick Jim. So it's okay if I don't pick Jim. Jim will not be mad at me if I don't pick Jim. And so it was kind of what evoked that emotion for me. So even though in a lot of ways, I feel like Andy came off of a lot of what Jim put there for him when X-Men first came out, right? A lot of what Andy is bringing to the table is coming behind Jim, trying to keep up that, because Jim did an amazing job with those group shots and the action and stuff. So, but I think Andy really carried that and really carried it very strongly for a long time to really keep that book going, right? X-Men was the new book. And so you bring in, the big guns with Jim to do the beginning of the book, and then you move into other artists. And for Andy to be able to keep that book going and to keep it popular and for it to be able to go on for as long as it did, I think says a lot about his art.
Yeah, I find it interesting because you did choose Wilt Portacio. So Wilt Portacio was doing Uncanny and Jim Lee was doing, the adjectiveless X-Men. So, but you had a more personal connection with Wilt Portacio. So I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, and it really just comes down to the way Will drew Storm. Like, really, that's what it comes down to. And just how much I connected with that at the time.
So I have another question. So like 1 through 4 are kind of like, in that 90s. Well, Alan spans multiple eras. But Paul Smith is from the early on. So did you have nostalgia for Paul Smith stuff?
The Paul Smith stuff is the stuff that I picked up once I was a little bit older. So once I was 18 or 19, had access to comic shops and was just digging through bins and stuff and seeing just what caught my eye, right? I was at that age where I didn't really know a lot of people or I didn't know a lot of things about. So it was just what caught my eye. And the Paul Smith books caught my eye. And I just love those stories. I loved a lot of the stories that focused on Kitty. I think that she was the character that really drew me into a lot of his books. And then once I was reading them, it was just everything. I love anything he did with the Brood. I always thought was amazing. He's one of the artists that I think, did the best work with Brood. And I think that it's, and I've also I remember the first time I met Paul, kind of telling him about all these exciting things and how much I loved the book. And so it really was just that what captured me in the back issue bin. And I know that's it's hard to explain, but it just really drew me in that way. And Stephen, to answer your question, I love Jim's work, and it's just, I didn't love Jim as much 20 years ago as I do now.
Yeah, Stevens, he's number 6. Give her a break.
Yeah, he was my number 6. So I think a lot of it has to do with my perspective, at that time period, and what drew me in to the books from certain artists more than others.
All right. Jason, Bill, any feedback on her rank?
No. I mean, well, I'm glad Tatiana was on the panel, because she really hits on a period that I'm least focused on as a fan of the X books and the creators that were doing the work then, which is why we had the crossover on Paul Smith, but none of the others. So no, I thought it was Tatiana. You were here to kind of balance out the list a bit, and you did a fantastic job. I'm so glad. But yeah, I wish I had read more during that time. I think I would have a different appreciation for Andy, because he really, I look back on it now, and he did some great work. He worked on some really great stories, but he just doesn't have that same, I just don't have it right here for him. I wish I did. And same thing with Alan Davis. Maybe after I read Excalibur, I'll think a lot differently about Alan. Hey, Alberto, we'll recap everybody's stuff too at the end.
It's probably Mark, but I'll ask him.
Alberto, we'll have the whole list that each of us picked at the end, so you'll be able to see who we each did by that time.
All right. So moving on to Jason.
All right. Let me give you a little preface here before you go into the artist. So I kind of wanted to try to, there's a lot of nostalgia in all of our picks, right? Tatiana, you saw the time frame she read, you saw the time frame Bill read. The same thing's going to happen with me. But I tried to be a little subjective, as subjective as possible with this. I narrowed the list down to about 9 or 10 artists right away, right? I picked a top 9, I think it was. So then I wanted to kind of have some kind of basis for what I was thinking. So I started to look at their contributions, right? I talked a lot about when talking about your artists, what character designs they had, what storylines they were involved in. So you'll hear me talk a lot about that while I'm talking to my points, to kind of give you an idea how I picked it. But you're going to see it's painted with nostalgia through and through. So I think my first pick is actually somebody we haven't seen yet, right, Larry?
Yes.
Marc Silvestri, right? This was a tough one. Obviously, there were artists getting to that 5th one. Tatiana said it earlier. It was difficult to make these decisions. It was nearly impossible. Silvestri, to me, was perfect for the X-Men at the time, right? The mid 80s, everything was getting darker, right? What came before this was hope. In the 80s, it was a darker time. It was darker. Your anti-heroes were coming up, so on and so forth. And the X-Men were there too. When you start talking about, the fall of the mutants and the Inferno storylines and so on and so forth, these aren't happy times. Silvestri's edgier style just kind of totally fit exactly what that time needed. And I think that him and Green were a perfect kind of matching there to kind of carry on and evolve what the X-Men were before it. So Silvestri, going into what I was talking about, covers that are memorable. That's the other thing I really looked at when I was looking at these X-Men is artists. I was looking at what covers do I remember. And when you think about, 251, Wolverine crucified on the X, the 234, Wolverine's turning into a brood. Havoc blasting Wolverine on 221. These are all covers that are ingrained in my mind. And you can see it when you're watching CAF. You see these covers being recreated by other artists 40 years, 35 years later, whatever it is. So it just kind of gives you the depth of importance of this artist to the X-Men mythos. And then when you think about characters that were designed, right? Mr. Sinister is his. That design for Mr. Sinister was so out there compared to what we've seen before. Goblin Queen. Every day you can turn CAF on and see a Goblin Queen cover or sketch or commission, right? Again, something so far from what we expected from the kind of Jean Grey, Phoenix mythos. Goblin Queen was the opposite end of it, right? The Reavers, Gateway, the whole Outback X-Men, again, something that reverberates so long from then to this day. So I couldn't leave Silvestri off the list. You know, I left some bangers off and you'll see it, but Silvestri for me had to be there just because of how much influence along it. And like I said, how his style fit the time so perfect.
Yeah, Jason, I love this Silvestri choice. I mean, I think he's great. The one problem, I mean, and it's not really his fault. He didn't have the best toys to play with. Like that X-Men team was Havoc, Dazzler, Longshot, and English Psylocke. It's like, if he traded places with probably one of his earlier predecessors, I think his run would be more legendary. But I think, I wish they kind of they took over when they kind of revamped the whole team. And to me, the revamp of the whole new team, Colossus was like part-time, Nightcrawler wasn't there. I mean, Rachel Phoenix wasn't there, no Cyclops. So they kind of gave him like the JV team, but he worked with what he got. But I just wish, I'd like to see how good he would be if he had like, some of the more popular characters during his run. But no, he worked with like, the revamped team. That's my take on it.
I would agree with people in the chat and as well that when I went back and read the Silvestri issues, they were some of my least favorite books I'd read as in X-Men comics. I mean, the Reavers all that stuff I just read. It just didn't do anything for me. The characters were cool, his art was great, but I just didn't like the stories, and that's unfortunate because I look at his art in general and like, I love Silvestri. That's why I want a page. I got to get one in my collection. But I hated the stories. I just couldn't get into them. And those might have been ones where I bought the issues and just didn't even read them after I just get started. And I'd be like, oh, it's just not what I want out of an X-Men book. And probably because I was missing all my main characters as well. So that probably played a little bit into it, but doesn't diminish, his talent. But I mean, it just that trying to go back and read them after the fact, with with where I'd come from and some of the books I was reading at the time that I really was enjoying. These books just didn't do it for me story-wise.
For me, when I was going back into, checking out the books that I hadn't read, these didn't speak to me at all. I didn't read any of his stories until way later because it just didn't look interesting to me. Just the characters and the, just a lot of the extra sexy factor just didn't speak to me at all at that time. Now, Mark's one of my favorite artists. And I own several pieces for Mark. Obviously, Joe inked Mark for a long time. So, I've met Mark and I love his work, but I tend to love Mark's stuff much later in his career. This stuff just isn't, and I have the trades, but it's just not, I don't have an interest in sitting down and reading it over again either.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll say this one thing about Mark. I mean, Silvestri, and I love his art too. I mean, he draws one of the best rogues ever. But like he was so good in X-Men, but throughout his career you see his art just gets better. It's like X-Men, he was great, and then he got to Cyberforce, he went to another level, and then like now his artwork is incredible. It's like leaps before, after what he's done here in X-Men. But I mean, I love over the last couple of years looking at Mark Silvestri's evolution. And it's just, like Jim Lee. Okay, he's great, but Jim Lee from, his X-Men era to today, they're very similar. Mark has reinvented himself several times, and it's all been for the better.
Mhm.
So. All right. So
Yeah, I really liked Mark's later work on X-Men.
Yeah.
The later stuff that he did, that was just mentioned in the chat as well.
The Morrison era.
Yeah, that's the
Yeah.
stuff
Yeah.
Joe inked too. So I really like Joe's. I mean, I like Dan Green's inks on Mark as well, but with Mark's later style, which was significantly different, I think Joe's inks look really good on that. Because it is, like you said, Larry, it's if you look at, if people didn't know Mark's work and you have one of Mark's old X-Men pages to one of his later X-Men pages side by side, a lot of people wouldn't recognize that it was the same artist.
all right, we're gonna go to your number 4 now, Jason.
Number 4 is going to be a more popular fake, right? Jim Lee. As dark as Silvestri and Romita's time on the X-Men were, Jim Lee was bringing it back into the light, right? And he was the perfect artist for that. His art, I remember, now I was a kid reading this, right? So this is my, I don't know, what was I in when this came out? In the late 80s, I was 13, 14, the same as Tatiana taking Madureira off the shelf. Jim Lee was just eye-catching. It just popped off the page. I actually picked. I didn't pick any covers. This DPS was one of the pieces that I gave Larry to show as an example. And the reason I wanted to do that, because Jim's interiors are cover quality to everybody else, right? Like this was one of the unique new things looking at his art on the X-Men is every page was dynamic. Every page was exciting. The energy was there. It just revolutionized the whole industry, if you really think about it, right? Because he went on to do X-Men 1, which is the highest selling book ever. It started the gatefold covers and all that, and then the renumbering and so on and so forth. And Jim is so revered, and his run really wasn't that long on X-Men. I had actually read an article someone wrote about trying to, pick up an X-Men page, and there's only so many pages and so many Wolverine and so many costumes, what have you. And when you really look at it, there's only 20 issues or so of Jim Lee combined on the X-Men between the two runs. And the impact was huge, right? Savage Land Rogue, the blue team, the gold team, folding X Factor back into the main X-Men, kind of revamping the whole look of the original X-Men. Omega Red, the Acolytes, Ninja Psylocke, right? Asian Psylocke is one of the best character and most mind-blowing changes to a character that's ever come. Extinction Agenda, the Wolverine Cap flashback issue, right? Wolverine had always been, just seeing him doing the history of Wolverine was just something so. It's so burnt into my mind. It's so memorable. Jim Lee is one of the greatest artists of all time. I think anyone could say that. And without his X-Men run, he wouldn't be who he is today. So I don't think you can talk X-Men or talk X-Men artists without Jim Lee.
Well, I promise you, if we do a Batman one of these, Jim will be in my top 5. I was just thinking about how you were saying that and how much Jim influenced also Batman. When Jim did Batman, it did the same thing for really brought this energy into Batman as well. So that just triggered that in my mind because he brought that same energy when he moved to DC. But that's another day. We won't talk about
another story.
About Batman.
That's true. And hey, I wanted to highlight a comment from Facebook since I know most people are watching on YouTube. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but Joseph is just saying that for us, our picks are very nostalgic based, and how that influences our original art collecting as well. And I don't think that's something we're going to touch on, but that's something that I thought clearly, our love for different time periods and different storylines are what affect our OA collecting. I mean, that's always been that way, but certainly when I look at X-Men art. Those creators in my top 5 are probably always going to be on my top 5. I wouldn't care how much artwork I would be able to own from from any of those guys, and of course a couple I own nothing from them. But it's true, and I think that's kind of what I was hoping we would kind of take away from seeing whom our most favorite artists are, is that it does influence our collecting, because it's, you know, we love that work so much, and it kind of just feeds on itself. So nostalgia is going to be a big part in all of these, in all of our picks tonight.
I'm laughing at Oranga.
Thank you.
That's what Jason said the other night when we were in chat. He made the Moon Knight joke.
Yes, he did.
All right.
So speaking of Jim, I did want to say that I had asked Joe who his favorite. I ran down and asked him, and his two favorites. His number one is Byrne Austin. So he obviously is putting the inker together, and his number two is Lee Williams. So, and he was talking about how much Jim has influenced his art, which I think is very typical for, you know, that entire generation. So not only do collectors love Jim's art, but Jim's been incredibly influential for an entire generation of comic book artists as well.
All right, number three. Who's saying about nostalgia being the key to this story? Well, here it is. The only thing that's wrong with Paul Smith's run on the X-Men is the fact that it was too short, right? I absolutely look. I think X-Men 175 is the perfect comic. I think it's the perfect standalone X-Men story. It also happens to be the first comic that was ever given to me as a child. I was 6 years old and my mind was blown with X-Men 175. So I will always think of Paul Smith's X-Men as the X-Men from that issue. I say it all the time. 174, 176 was my first comic. I'd probably be a Spider-Man fan or an Avengers fan. Who knows? But that comic was perfect. And it was, the story we're telling was awesome. But I was 6, 7 years old. The stories didn't matter. It was the pictures. It was the art. It was the beautiful. I mean, Paul Smith's lines and characters and colors just were so complemented perfectly. You can read a Paul Smith comic, I think, without the words and know what's going on, cover to cover. And there's not a lot of artists that can do that. I think it was Tatiana said it when she was talking about Paul. His expressions on his characters are just amazing. If you look on the left-hand side, you know, the expression on Madeline's face in the bottom left-hand corner, you don't need words there to know that she's not happy with what's going on there. And, you know, the splash on the right-hand side is just showing you how dynamic he can be, right? Phoenix is, anytime I get a commission, it's Phoenix, and it's because of Paul Smith's Phoenix from that 175. And that wasn't even Phoenix, right? It was just unbelievable the way he pulled those characters together. And it's not just that issue, the entire run. You're talking about a 12-issue run that had some unbelievable stuff. Tatiana had one of the pages from 172 or 173 highlighted. You know, that whole Japan story, Wolverine getting married, the marriage falling through, just reverberated for 30 years from those two issues. The Storm's redesign, the Punk Storm. I mean, I talked about Savage Land Rogue for Jim Lee. Punk Storm, Mohawk Storm. It was just, think about what Storm was. The look of Storm before Punk Storm was, again, just such an incredible change to happen, and so beloved, and so pushed her to the next level. And Storm is one of my favorite characters too. Tatiana, I was really impressed when you were talking about her with Portaccio. But that evolution created the Storm we know today, and that's so important. That design is all his. Lockheed, who could forget Lockheed with Kitty? That was Paul's design. You know, you got Rogue joining at that time. You got the Scott and Madeline thing coming on the heels of Jean dying and kind of getting Cyclops back into the game. Cyclops left the team for a long time. He came back in Paul Smith's time. I love Paul Smith's work. If it was a longer run, he would be number one. And it is based in nostalgia, but it also is based in the fact that you can go back and look at these pages now, and I would put these pages up against any artist in any genre. His line work is amazing, the storytelling, so on and so forth. I just kind of love it. The Storm fighting Callisto, they introduced the Morlocks, right? These are all far-reaching storylines that were all his designs, and that's really important to me, right? Because we're talking X-Men. We're all X-Men collectors here because of the stories. The art carried the story, right? I'm a firm believer that the art and the writing go hand in hand, and Paul Smith's run was almost perfect synergy to me anyway. So that's why he's my number 3.
So you're a Phoenix fan because of Paul Smith and not because of John Byrne. Is that right?
My first introduction to Phoenix was that 175. So yes, eventually the character, I love the character, and Byrne hasn't come up yet, and I'm 3 in, and he will. But that was the first visual of Phoenix I had, was Paul Smith's 175, and that's still today. If I'm standing in front of an artist and they're like, "What do you want me to draw?" I'm going to say Phoenix.
I think that I just want to echo how Paul drew Phoenix. One of the things I love about the way he drew Phoenix is she's powerful, yet she's still soft. And he does a really good job of balancing that line. What I like about the way he draws a lot of women is the exact opposite of what I like about the way Wills drew Storm, right? It's very powerful, but in a completely different way, in a way that is very uniquely Paul Smith. I don't know anybody else who captures women in the same way that Paul does.
Agree, 100%. A page I owned was a page from 167, and it was a Talking Heads page, and it was just Scott and Madeline ordering breakfast, and it was just still beautiful. No costumes, no space, no brood, no nothing, and the page was still just gorgeous. So
yeah,
can't go
I think
wrong
it's
with
interesting you said 175 is like the perfect comic, because to me, like, Paul Smith best work into X-Men was actually not part of the main series. It was Alpha Flight X-Men. That 2-issue miniseries was gorgeous. It was amazing. The storytelling, God, I love that.
So do I, Larry. I'm right on board with you. I'm along with that. But 175 one issue. Go read it again.
I'm gonna have to go back and read it. I own page 1 to that Alpha Flight and X-Men book, of course. The first issue, but very little Paul Smith on it. But at least I can say I own a piece of Paul Smith art.
Right. Nice.
I'm about to blow Steve's mind because he just took a guess at my first and second. So give me my second and then skewer me, Larry.
All right. Go to number 2.
Yeah. This is one that I'm sure is going to be controversial, especially where I ranked him. But I just think John Romita Jr.'s first run on the X-Men was amazing. It's a huge run, right? He was on the book forever. He defined the style. I talked earlier about Silvestri coming in at a time when the X-Men storylines were dark. Well, Romita is where those dark stories started coming from, and his art was edgier, and his art was just perfect for what was going on with there, and the things that happened during Romita. When I think of Colossus, I think of Romita, right? But when I think of, there is no second Phoenix, there is no Rachel Phoenix without John Romita's design for that. His storytelling, you could tell he learned it, from his father. You can see the influences in his art. You can see the influences that he pulled the comic together the way it was supposed to be, the way that it should have been done. I think that Romita's second run waters down his first run, right? Because people tend to think of the two, and they're really totally two different artists. If you go look at the line art from the different sides of it, it's so different. So I'm really talking John Romita, first run, John Romita, obviously. And again, going back to what stands out, the covers that he did in his run. The 199 cover, Mike, that was one I was just about to mention. The 207 cover with Wolverine slicing down the comic book. The 210 cover, the Mutant Massacre, the beginning of that, the roughed up X-Men about to kind of totally get crushed there. The one that going even further back, 193, introducing the second Thunderbird, becomes Warpath, and the Hellions, that cover. Just Warpath, Thunderbird is dead, and all of a sudden you see a book on a perfect Thunderbird fighting Wolverine on that cover. Just amazing. You can go even further back, because if you remember, the cover to the first Dazzler issue, 130, is John Romita Jr., right? So he's just starting there for the first piece of X-Men art that you could think of, and then going all the way through the second run, which was the end of the 300s. He's got a 40-issue run in the middle of there. The stuff that happens, that he introduces, Forge, right? Val Cooper, Freedom Force, the Marauders, right? These are all long-standing characters that are his design. I talked about Warpath and Hellion, the Hellions. Again, a foil for the New Mutants that he designed. Hounds, the second Phoenix, that whole furthering of the Days of Future Past storyline and bringing it back into the main storyline. All his designs. The covers that we've highlighted here, the 200 cover, the Magneto on trial, that's been redone so many times out, but this is the first one. This is the first time that he took the hit for his past deeds. And having a battle going on behind him is just a powerful cover to me. And then the Vision versus Colossus cover, right? I didn't count the amount of heads behind him, but there's got to be 40 or 50 different characters that he did each head on in the background, again, of almost having, you can see both covers, having that 2 layers of covers is just, you can't knock the guy's artistic chops. Oh, ML's coming at me now.
I'm trying to not laugh really loud. Like, I'm about to mute myself. These guys are making me laugh.
I can't read the things while I'm talking about the art.
Hard.
But,
yep.
I've always loved the X-Men cover with Magneto. Like, it's so powerful. The way that his shoulders are rounded forward, just that in a way that you were not used to seeing that character. And I just thought that JR has never been my favorite artist. I like his stuff. He's hit or miss for me. I saw somebody else post that. When I love his stuff, I love it. When I don't, he's just not my favorite. He's a great guy, just not always my favorite. But that cover has always stuck out to me because it's just really special. He really captured so much in that cover.
Tatiana, if you would have asked me when we first discussed this, if JR would have been in my top 5, I would have said no. When I was going through all the art and like, oh, wow, look at that. Oh, wow, look at that. Oh, wow, look at this. I forgot this cover. I forgot he did this cover. I forgot he did this cover. It just kept adding up. And like I said in the beginning of this, I had my 8 or 9 artists that were in contention for me. And if you had made me make decisions without research or without looking back on stuff, he probably wouldn't have been there. But when I weighed everything and felt the feels and saw the art and saw the raw art, because I'm looking on CAF, I'm not looking in comics again, right? Because especially this 80s, 90s, the colors muddied a lot of this art up, right? And when you go look at the actual original art of it, it's so much nicer. And that's kind of where the John Romita came from. So if you asked me 2 weeks ago, would Romita have been in my top 5? I would have said no. And here he is at number 2.
No, that's a really great point at like the the books versus the originals. And we talked about that with one of the other artists that's on the list that didn't make any of our top 5s that we felt like is such a better artist when you look at. And it doesn't mean a colorist is bad. It just means that they weren't a good match, or, I mean, there's a million different reasons. And when you're looking at comics from the 80s, a lot of the colors could have been hit and miss. And sometimes it did really ruin the look of the book.
Yep.
Well,
Jason?
after listening to you, Jason, I feel like I should have put John Romita Jr. in my list, but I'm still not sold. But I will agree with you. One of my all-time favorite storyline, well, just stories, was issue 183. The bar fight with Juggernaut and Colossus. That cover is absolutely amazing. The story was great. The art was perfect for it. So yeah, maybe I should have put John Romita Jr. in my list after all. But
you can bump Jim Lee in now, Bill.
I could, but then that would bump the guy I left off. So I can't do it right now. But if maybe a year from now, after I reread some of the issues, maybe I'll think a little differently.
Yeah.
Then you'll have Alan Davis in your list.
Well, if I read Excalibur, maybe.
All right, Lara, get me. Come on.
Jason, number 2. You have to be out of your mind to put John Romita Jr. number 2. Seriously, number 2 over Jim Lee, over Silvestri. I mean, number 2 for John Romita Jr.
Larry, I surprised myself.
I think that's crazy.
I surprised myself when I came up with this.
Yeah. I get it. I get it. When you go over and look at all the list and you narrowed it down, I can see you have to rethink it. But number 2 over Jim Lee. I get it. It's all nostalgia driven. But
I just kept coming up with covers, Larry, cover after cover after cover after cover. Sorry, guys.
This is a very surprise. This is a big surprise to me when I saw that number 2, John Romita Jr. But yeah, wow.
Surprise to all.
It's like saying Dan Marino is the number 2 quarterback of all time. It's like,
whoa.
All right. No more low blows. I'll go to your number 1.
And number 1 will be more popular, I'm sure.
The one person who's better than John Romita Jr.
The one person. John Byrne. The X-Men aren't the X-Men without John Byrne. Cockrum started it. Kirby created it. But Byrne made the X-Men we know. Wolverine's not the character we know, right? Without John Byrne. And he's admitted it, his Canadian influence. He wanted that character to pop. He kind of took him under his own wing. This image that Larry picked here, I mean, I would wait till the comments for this, but I would put that image of Wolverine up against any image in the history of Wolverine being drawn, right? Like, I think it's just perfect. The other thing about this splash, Byrne gets beat up a little bit for his women. I think the storm is just beautiful that he drew the damsel in distress down the bottom of that. The other thing about this splash and this issue, I was so happy that Bill referenced these issues as his favorite Byrne story because I knew this was coming up. Sauron was designed by Neal Adams. I love Neal Adams. I talked about that during Bill's session. I just couldn't pick him because there wasn't enough meat on the bone there for Best X-Men. But Sauron was designed by Neal Adams. So you would think no one would ever be able to draw a character as well as Neal Adams. But look at this. Look at this beast he created here. And the splash from the issue before is even nicer image of it. Byrne is everything for the X-Men, right? Phoenix is one of my favorites. Byrne built Cockrum again, created Phoenix, but Phoenix isn't what she is without the Byrne issues, right? Alpha Flight, the Brown Wolverine costume, the Shadow King, Mariko, Mastermind, Proteus, Kitty Pryde, Dazzler. You could just list off every issue of the Byrne run, which was 35 issues long, is important. They're all keys. Everything, something happened in every one of those issues in some capacity. Going back again, the Dark Phoenix saga, X-Men Days of Future Past, that's my favorite storyline of all time for X-Men. And the 141 cover, if there was a way to say what cover has been homaged the most, the 141 cover is the cover that has been replicated, copied, tried, recreated in every single way. We're looking at a Doctor Strange movie coming out, the multiverses, right? 141 Days of Future Past, without that, that's the beginning of the time jump, future bad histories, whatever, trying to change the futures. Those designs, those images were just incredible. The X-Men getting killed in that second issue, right? Just think about how that must have impacted a little. I didn't read them as a kid. I read them in Classic X-Men, but I can only imagine how that impacted somebody. Bill talked about how Phoenix dying, how that impacted somebody. Those moments between Cyclops and Phoenix at the end of that story are they're beautiful. And Claremont wrote them, but Byrne brought it to life. And Byrne brought everything we know about X-Men to life. So this one, as much as Romita was a surprise to me when I built this list, this one wasn't a surprise. I figured he was going to be at the top of the heap here. I know I left Cockrum off the list. I don't think Cockrum's dynamic. I think he built a foundation, but he built that foundation, and Byrne built the building. Right? He made it what it was, and that's how I feel about it. I don't really know what else to say about it, but I just think Byrne is home run across the board, number one.
I think that's, what you just said. I think if people have asked us several times in the chat tonight, where's Kirby? Where's Kirby? Where's Kirby? And I think that is a lot of that too. Kirby built a lot of things. He started a lot of things. But when you think about the way the characters look and all of those other things, you don't think about Kirby. And I think that you're right on the mark with John Byrne. There are so many fans out there who don't even read comics, who are influenced by the looks that John Byrne created. They recognize characters in a way that he created without even knowing who he is, because of how much his character looks have stood the test of time. So his for Storm, my favorite Storm is Mohawk Storm. My second favorite Storm is Byrne Storm. So I have commissions of both, but and they're very different looks, but I absolutely love, the regal Storm that Byrne drew. And yeah, it's just, I think it's that iconic factor that you can go up to anyone, anywhere, and who's this character, and show them, John Byrne Wolverine, and everyone's going to know who that is.
Tatiana, I noticed you missed John Byrne from your list. Where would you rank him? Like, if you kept going?
He probably would have been 7 or 8 for me.
Mm-hmm.
So definitely a huge influence for me, and an artist I love, but an artist whose stories I didn't get into until later.
I see.
So, but definitely 7 or 8 for sure. Like, he's up there.
Yeah, and I know folks are talking about Kirby. Where's Kirby? Where's Kirby? I will say that you're not going to see Kirby on my list either, and the reason is because the way I see X-Men is there's a pre golden giant size X-Men, and then there's the post giant size X-Men, and the pre giant size X-Men didn't interest me as much as it did after giant size X-Men, and giant size X-Men felt like a whole completely different book than it was. Yes, Cyclops, Marvel Girl, yes, they overlap, but it felt a whole different series and books when I go to look at X-Men after giant size X-Men #1.
Look, I'll just comment on Kirby because I know we're getting beat up for this about demographics. I'm a fan of Kirby's. You want to talk Fantastic Four artists, you want to talk Captain America artists, Kirby did 10 issues of X-Men, right? After that, he laid out a few more after that. He did create it. The same reason Alan Davis isn't on this list, because I look at him as an Excalibur artist. I just think there's so many things Kirby was more known for and more did better than what he did on the X-Men. We talk about the Paul Smith run being small at 12 or 14 issues. Kirby did less than that, and it was in its infancy. So I just don't think he got a chance to do enough of it so we could see enough of it. At least that's my feelings around Kirby.
I don't have any. I figured I'll talk about that when I get to my didn't make the cut list, but
okay.
Jason, again, you can't argue Byrne. I just wanted to go back to that. Yeah, I mean, I'm disappointed in you not putting Cockrum on your list, as everybody knows, but I agree with you that the X-Men 141 cover, after maybe Amazing Fantasy 15, is the most homaged cover ever, right? I mean, as far as it's just the most memorable, and I think people have given it the most respect. So again, your #1 pick is pretty hard to disagree with. I'll give you that.
#1.
And the comments about the demographics and who's on this panel and who's not, they're absolutely correct. Mm-hmm. If we had a collector who was another 10 or 15 years older in the panel, we're going to have a different list. Just like my list is very different from Bill's, right? Like that's just part of how it works. When you grew up, really does make a difference. So we're not in any way saying that we don't like Kirby or Kirby's not great. It is just the reality of who's on the panel. And we have more things to talk about after Larry's top 5 anyway. So
okay.
Let's go, Larry. You're up, buddy.
All right. So my picks. All right, so #5 is John Romita Jr. Yes, I gave Jason a bunch of grief for John Romita Jr., but I don't have it at #2. I mean, that's just crazy. but I do have him from #5 for the same reasons that Jason gave. So during John Romita Jr.'s run, this is what I call like the fun era. I mean, he's right. There's a lot of memorable covers that were done, and I do wonder, what if it was somebody other than John Romita who drew that stuff? Would I love the artist more? Like imagine, what if Silvestri did that run instead of John Romita Jr.? But that's not what happened. John Romita did that run, and he put together some memorable stories. I mean, this to me, this was like the fun era where they just went from one adventure to another adventure. Now, I put a colored piece because I don't know anybody who has original art, but that cover with Caliban and Kitty Pryde, that's burned in my mind. It's like, what the heck is this? This is what's going on. Kitty Pryde is marrying this guy. So so something like that is just I remember this is I remember I walked in the store and say, what is going on here? That's the cover. And then you got in the later run, you see the Sentinel. I mean, I love good Sentinel scenes with the X-Men, and here, I mean, this is when they're just beating them up, and like these Sentinels are gigantic. You know, Rogue is just going through the chest. I mean, like Jason said, he's done so many memorable covers, and then this, of course, here's this this nice Wolverine, you know, tearing the cover, and you know, he's done a few commissions of those over the years. So yeah, I mean, this is, you know, John Romita Jr. He had this memorable run. You had Nimrod, issue 193 with Warpath and the Hellions, you know, fighting against the X-Men. That was a really great issue. It wasn't, I don't think he was called Warpath at that time. I think everybody thought he was Thunderbird and they called him Thunderbird, but it was actually, his younger brother who turned out to be Warpath. So this was just like from one adventure, you know, one or two issues with one adventure and just went on to another. And I think John Romita Jr. benefited more so than say Silvestri by having, you know, a lot of the more popular characters to work with and going on all these different adventures. So I put John Romita Jr. at number 5. Yes. And there are going to be snubs, you know, that's lower on the list, but I had to give John Romita Jr. a credit for a lot of these memorable covers and memorable stories that he did.
Well, like I said, after Jason's talk earlier and now yours, I definitely probably should have considered John Romita Jr. a little bit more closely.
And Larry should have pushed them up further, but we'll talk about that later.
Yeah, I see Tim putting his top 5. Guys, feel free to, you know, put your top 5. I mean, you've all seen of ours, so I'm pretty sure I mean, a lot of us will you know, have like at least 2 or 3 people different for each list. So, all right.
And I think that's what makes it fun, right? There is no right or wrong answer.
Correct.
Right. So my number 4 is Dave Cockrum. Now I could probably argue that he probably should be higher in the list. But Dave, I think we have this panel because of someone like Dave. Now, you know, some folks on the chat, they're saying Jack Kirby created, you know, the X-Men. I think if Dave probably, you know, created a whole different book with the same characters, we might be talking about that other book. But, you know, I give Dave, you know, he designed great costumes, and I think that's been mentioned in the chat. So, and I think in interviews he said he took designs that were planned for Legion of Superheroes and he put them in for the X-Men instead. So you had Colossus, Storm, and Thunderbird, and Nightcrawler. Nightcrawler and Colossus, their costumes are classic. They're relevant today. I mean, ever since they showed up on the first page, they are relevant today. Everybody recognizes that costume and love it. And everything else has been a derivative of that costume. Imperial Guards, Starjammers. I mean, Dave was just full of creativity. His art was probably not as sharp as John Byrne, but Dave still knew how to draw like a dynamic page. Dave Cockrum, I give him all the credit for all the designs and you know, setting the foundation for Byrne and everybody else afterwards. So, you know, I think, you know, a lot of the artists that we mentioned today, I mean, their careers would be different without Dave Cockrum. So I think Dave Cockrum, in terms of impact, and also, you know, he was also a really great artist. You know, I put him as number 4.
So you see in these pages, I mean, I think you could have ranked him a little higher, to be honest, Larry. But but it's true. Yeah, I mean, his costume design, top notch. I mean, looking at this early work, man. I mean, Dave was just a master storyteller. He could do action like he was on par with anybody else, man. I just looking at these pages, man. I don't know how you didn't put him number 2 or number 3, to be quite honest. But I don't know. Yeah, I look at these now, and yeah, that's why he's my number 1. I mean, I knew that Byrne wasn't better than Dave, because Dave's just.
Oh, now you're getting crazy.
Oh, that's dissing Jason because Byrne was his number 1. All right,
well,
sure.
I'm in Jason's camp. I'm Byrne over Cockrum, but I completely understand where you're coming from. But to me, if I look at their work side by side of the same characters, I just prefer Byrne. But I completely respect the fact that Dave built that. Like, absolutely, I respect that. But I just prefer Byrne's work.
I won't hold it against you.
I think that's what sours me on Cockrum, to be honest with you, is I just think Byrne did Cockrum better. Does that make sense what I'm saying? I mean, I just always compare the two so closely, and Cockrum's design, you're right. They're monumental. They're amazing. They've survived over time, but if they weren't back to back, I think I would revere Cockrum more than I do. I guess is where it is.
Mm-hmm.
I won't delete your CAF account, Jason.
Thank you. I have a nice Cockrum example.
I know you do. You do. I know.
All right. My number 3 is Jim Lee. Now, this is all about impact. I mean, Jim Lee, he didn't have like the longest run on the X-Men, but I think a lot of people in the chat will agree with me in saying Jim Lee sort of his X-Men art defines the style for an entire generation. I mean, Tatiana mentioned it earlier. So I mean, how many artists do you say that's a Jim Lee clone? That's a Jim Lee clone. He's a Jim Lee clone. He's a Jim Lee clone. I mean, this was Jim. I mean, he set up a style that everybody loved the X-Men because of Jim Lee and his style. So, and this is late 80s. He also had, created the number 1 selling comic book of all time, which was X-Men number 1. I mean, he took, a popular book, Uncanny X-Men, and took it another step. And I think, Jim Lee, just for his generational impact, you probably argue that I could put him higher than number 3, but Jim Lee is number 3 to me. Just because, his impact, I'm not a huge fan of his run. I mean, yeah, he has great art, but I wasn't a great fan of the stories. I don't love them like like the stories of John Romita Jr. But I mean, I can't ignore, and I think many of us here, we can't ignore the impact that Jim Lee had on the entire industry.
It's funny, Larry, as you talk about people being Jim Lee clones, that reminded me of a story. So, Brandon Peterson took over X-Men right after Jim, and that was Brandon's first gig. That was his first gig, was X-Men. And he was told to draw like Jim.
Yep.
So they're like, we'll give you this job as long as you can draw like Jim. So yeah, I mean, they knew how much people loved the work for sure.
Just reading the comment, Jim Lee's a Dan Marino of comics.
I didn't want to make Jason cry, so I didn't want to highlight that one. But
except I think Jim Lee's won championships. Yeah, so. All right.
Look, we all
my
agree
number
on
2 is Andy Kubert. I think this is something that only me and Tatiana had. Tatiana had it as number 1. I had Andy Kubert as number 2. And I'm going to say this. So, I mean, longevity matters. And Andy Kubert, he started at issue 14 of X-Men and went all the way to like 59. Plus he did I think it was the Amazing X-Men, and during Age of Apocalypse. So he has about 50 issues. That was 50 issues of great art, consistency. He's only had like a few fill-in issues, but he spent like 6 years dedicated to this book. And this is around the time when, Image was a big deal. And so he could have left, maybe he probably could have left to Image for more money. I don't know. But he said, I'm going to stick with X-Men. This is now my book. I mean, Marvel was probably looking at who to pass the torch to from Jim Lee. And I think I don't think anybody realized Andy Kubert was going to carry that torch and then just go on for it for another 6 years. I don't think anybody else in our list has had such a huge run like Andy Kubert. I know John Byrne, he probably had like 35, but Andy Kubert was almost 50 issues. I mean, he lived and breathed X-Men. Like if you bought X-Men books during the 90s, you were reading Andy Kubert. So I give him a lot of credit for staying on that book for so long. And Adam, he had a pretty long run on Wolverine as well too. But yes. So the art that's here, this was kind of my grail. And this is, this was even though it's a Wizard issue, but it was a Wizard issue that kind of, went over the last 30 years of X-Men history for me because I couldn't afford to buy all the single issues. So that kind of summarized a lot of things for me. And Andy Kubert, to me, during the time when I was most interested in reading the X-Men, Andy Kubert was there. Executioner Song, Phalanx Covenant, Age of Apocalypse, Onslaught. I mean, those crossovers, those are pretty big deal, and Andy Kubert was there. And then there's issue number 30, which Brian Peck has a complete issue of, where Jean Grey and Scott Summers got married. So that was a big issue. So during the 90s, Andy Kubert was huge for me. I put him up there because of his longevity on the title. So.
All right, Larry, you beat up my number 2 pick. I don't know how Andy Kubert could be the number 2 X-Men artist when he's the number 3 artist in his family. I mean, his father was better. Adam was better.
Byrne.
Oh boy!
I don't know how that's possible. I'm a fan of Andy Kubert's art, but I think it's really hard for you to say how many people were influenced by Jim Lee and then have Andy Kubert above Jim Lee, and that's kind of where I'll leave that.
Jason, because the third time's the charm.
I mean,
I wanted to highlight Ruben's question here just because I know he asked it earlier to Tatiana as well, and I didn't highlight it at the time. I kind of missed it, so I'm showing it now because this was actually asked of both Larry and Tatiana by Ruben.
Okay, so great question, Ruben. So I remember that 266 cover with Gambit, the first appearance of Gambit. That was Andy Kubert cover. I look at it and I'm like, this looks like Joe Kubert. I mean, his style was very similar at that time to his father, and I thought it was cool. I mean, but it's also, this isn't Andy. This isn't the Andy that I remembered. So even though it's cool that he looked like a derivative of Joe Kubert, my I guess my criticism to myself was that I wish it looked more like Andy than less like Joe Kubert. And that's a 266 cover. And later on, I love that he developed his style. Now, yes, I get some folks like Adam better. I think that's subjective. Whether you like Andy or Adam, I preferred Andy. I mean, Adam had a more cartoony style that wasn't. I didn't love as much. I loved him with Wolverine, but when he did the X-Men or Hulk, I wasn't as in love with it. But to me, Andy, during the 90s was my favorite X-Men.
I think for me, I would agree with that. The early stuff, like, look, his dad's, he's a legend, right? Joe Kubert, Sergeant Rock, like, he's an absolute legend. I don't think anyone's gonna to argue with that. But I think when we're looking at X-Men books, I absolutely also preferred once Andy kind of developed his own style. And I love Adam's work on Ultimate X-Men. So that's where I really liked Adam's work. I feel like his work fit better in that kind of universe because it was a little bit different than the regular X books, and so I liked seeing the difference in their styles between the two books.
Cool. All right, so here's my number 1. Oh, the big surprise. So John Byrne, and this notation, I probably should have mentioned this back when I, talked about Jim Lee. I love Jim Lee with Mark Silvestri inks over him. And I thought it was just makes a huge difference. Like if Jim Lee was inking himself, I just don't love it as much as when Scott Williams inks over Jim Lee. That's just my personal taste. I mean, I think Scott Williams brings Jim Lee to a whole different level, and I love how Scott Williams inks over Jim Lee. Now Jim Lee inking himself, and then there's Scott Williams penciling inking himself. They're two different artists, but when you put them together, I mean, they're a great combo. And with my number one pick, I'm picking John Byrne with Terry Austin, because I think this was, this was, I mean, I pretty much, I read the Dark Phoenix saga very early on as a comic book collector, and that's pretty much what hooked me on comics itself. I was just amazed about what I just read, and I think the Dark Phoenix saga is what every X-Men story tries to reach in terms of that height. I mean, that sets such a high bar for everything else. And John Byrne and Terry, they worked 35 issues. I totally forgot how long that run was. I mean, how many years they worked together. Because I felt it was fleeting, because I read Dark Phoenix saga in a trade paperback. It felt like didn't feel that very long, but 35 issues, that's very respectable. And I'll say this again, he's John Byrne's number one, and longevity matters. This is the reason why you don't see Paul Smith on my list, because Paul Smith did like 11, 12 issues. Yes, they were gorgeous books, but 11 versus 35 or 11 versus 50, I got to give it to the guys who were consistently great, for a long period of time. And I don't know who else I could say with John Byrne that hasn't already been said. Him and Terry Austin, I mean, they were magic together, and I think they took what Cockrum built and set it into like a whole new, set it to like such a high bar that everybody else tried to live to. So
I agree with you 100% on that, Larry.
Yeah.
I'm totally with you about Terry Austin too. He's one of my favorite inkers, and I think that the two of them together just absolutely magic.
Well,
right.
I love John Byrne too, so it's a perfect pick.
I just pulled this off the wall for Bob McGann, who's hating on John Romita Jr. I literally just ripped it off the wall in front of me.
Guys don't know what Jason had to do to get that page.
Oh, well, yeah.
All right, so I think we're ready for. So my recap is, John Byrne, number one, Andy Kubert, number two, Jim Lee, number three, Dave Cockrum, number four, and John Romita Jr., number five. Now, just like Jason, I didn't think I would rank John Romita Jr. that high, but I had a lot of fond memories of that era that John Romita did, and he had a fairly long run as well. All right. So here's a scoring recap. So as Jason mentioned earlier, the number one pick got 5 points, and then it always went down. So Mark Silvestri, he only showed up on one of our lists, and it was number 5, and he got 1 point, but all the creators get all these points depending on where they rank on each of our lists. So so this is how it's got scored. And so the overall ranking is John Byrne, number 1, probably doesn't surprise anybody, 14. Andy Kubert was number 9, had 9 points. And that's because Tatiana had Andy at number 1, and I had Andy number 2. So those two high picks propelled Andy Kubert to number 2. And so guys, how do you feel about this ranking that you see? Any surprises here?
It's pretty close to what I had. I told you I narrowed it originally down to 9 or 10 artists without going further, and that's close. I'll be honest with you. I didn't have Portaccio on it. I did have Kirby on it. Other than that, I think it worked out. Byrne is where it belongs, and everything else is all muddled, which makes sense.
Well, I have 4 out of the 5 top 5, so I feel I've got pretty good taste. That's all I've got to say. Except for I didn't have Kubert in there. So I don't know, but yeah, no, I think the list is fair. Again, I still think Cockrum should be higher, but I get it. I mean, it's all about sampling, as far as everything. And this isn't like the perfect way. I mentioned to you guys, I do the same kind of weighted voting system when I do that book project that I work on, Infected by Art. And sometimes I look at it and I'm like, boy, that just didn't work out right. But I look at this and I think it's very fair based on the panel of voters and the way we all voted. I think that this is a very fair kind of overview outline of our top. You can say our top 10, top 11 here that got votes.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I mean, of course, I had Andy number 2 and number 1, so of course agreed with me. But this is kind of where I see the list. I mean, Paul Smith. I was the only one who didn't vote for Paul Smith, and that was only because he only did like 11 to 12 issues, and I think he left because of creator differences. But I think if Paul Smith stayed on for another maybe 5 or 10 issues, I would probably rank add him to the ranks and put him in higher. But it was such a short run. I wish he stayed on longer. And Jim Lee had 3 of us, and some people, Steven's surprised that Jim Lee's number 5, but 3 of us had him on the list, but we didn't have him higher than say number 3. So.
Yep. I agree.
Kirby's rolling his grave now.
Yeah. Well, but no. I think this worked. Yeah, honestly, this was fun. This worked out great. I think I haven't seen a lively chat like this outside of a Dueling Dealers episode. So I mean, even more so probably. Only the Berkey Albert match might have had more comments going on. So this is fantastic. We need more of these. But there you are, the greatest X-Men artist ever, John Byrne. And 3 great picks from you as well here, Larry. From
thank you,
Joseph's collection, Edwards and Wang's as well. This is nuts.
That's the first time I ever saw that piece in Joseph's collection, and I'm just so jealous of that Alpha Flight spec.
Joseph has an amazing collection. I mean, I always think of kind of focusing on British artists, but no, he really has an amazing eye, and he's been in the hobby a long time. So he's I'm always envious when I stumble into his calf gallery.
All right, so we're gonna do the best of the rest right now. So we're just gonna choose and talk about one of the other artists that weren't chosen. So, Bill, you're up first.
You're up. Best of the rest.
All right. So, before I talk about Werner Roth, because I probably would have picked Jack Kirby but instead I went with Werner Roth. But I want to see, where was that one? I had starred something here. This was by Michael McIsaac, and he said Kirby didn't seem to have the passion for X-Men that he did for Thor, Captain America, FF, and so on. And and that's kind of why I left him off my list. To be honest, I always felt like, I mean, the stories were okay, but if I go back and I look at Kirby's artwork, it just doesn't blow me away. He didn't have the same enthusiasm with the book. Like maybe this was, and I'm not a scholar at that time period of Marvel, but it just felt like, not that he was mailing it in, but it just didn't have the same intensity and passion that work on his other titles did. I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, if he's, he came up with the perfect student costume, right? The black and the yellow. I mean, they're used throughout X-Men's history. I mean, I can say that that's a huge contribution from Kirby. I mean, the New Mutants, launch at, same costumes. It's a wonderful, wonderful concept, but I just felt that Kirby didn't have it. Now, why did I pick Werner Roth? Or why, Werner, to me, he comes in.
Bill, wait one second, Bill.
Okay,
why don't you tell him? But the best of the rest had to be an artist that no one picked, right? So I just want to make sure everybody understands.
Oh, yes, exactly. Best of the rest had to be somebody that we didn't pick. That's why we showed that list previously with all the names crossed out. So,
and we all had to pick a different one from the best of the rest.
Yes, exactly. And Bill tastes a bit of the madness. All right. So why did I pick Werner Roth? I mean, you know what? I knew I had to pick one of the 3, Don Heck, Werner Roth, or Jack Kirby, because I wanted to give some love to the early X books. And the reason I picked Werner Roth is because, I'm not even sure the number of issue count that he did, but I believe it was in the mid 30s. He did like 3.5 years on the book. But I look at him today and I look at the work, and his work was really solid. And to this day, Werner Roth's art is really undervalued. I mean, for the work, for the time period, if you're an X fan and you're trying to get, you're not going to get a Kirby, you're not going to get an Adams. So what are you going to get? You're going to get a Werner Roth, and yet nobody appreciates any of his work. So when I was looking at, I did look at the Kirby's that were on CAF, and I looked at the Roths and the Hex. I had to go with Werner Roth because the body of work is there. I mean, maybe the stories weren't fantastic, but I mean, he carried the book along and got us to Neal Adams at least. So that's all. That's my pick, and in a way, it's a sympathetic vote because I look at his artwork today, and I think it should command a little bit of higher prices given where it's at. I mean, it's still lagging behind, but I don't even own a piece of Werner Roth art from X-Men. I'd love to have one. I mean, I'm kicking myself. Jason was telling me that I better get out there and get one soon. Right, Jason? So
yeah, you better go to Berkey's house now and pull one out.
I think you might have one, but it's got these giant beetles on it. It's a stupid story. I mean, a lot of them were, but again, at the end of the day, that's why he got my vote. And John Carlin says pump those Roth. If only I had some, I could be pumping the prices for myself. But no, this is a sympathetic vote. Guy put a lot of time in, and I wanted to give somebody other than Neal Adams, pre-Uncanny, some love. And I wish it could have been Kirby, only I just couldn't do it because of like I said, it just felt. I look at the art and I'm not as impressed. I don't think he loved it as much, but character design's awesome. It's what's carried us over to today. So I give Kirby 2 thumbs up for his effort.
Tatiana, you're up.
All right. So my pick is Tom Rainey. Tom is, first of all, a super cool guy. I've had the pleasure of knowing Tom for a while. And I think the reason I picked Tom is I feel like Tom is one of those artists, kind of what like Bill was saying, like Tom is one of those artists who's just underappreciated. He's incredibly talented. He has a great range in working in a lot of different superhero books. And I just wish more people knew who he was and appreciated his work. He did a lot of X-Men books, a lot of Uncanny. He did a lot of like fill-in issues, or he would do kind of like that 3-issue story between some of the other guys. So I think he didn't get a lot of recognition because he would be kind of stuck in between the two, Andy Kubert runs or the Pacheco runs or some of the other artists who were a little bit more popular. But Tom does a great job with picking up where other people have left off, if that makes sense. He creates a seamless transition in stories. And I think that when you're looking at sequential work and you're looking at, episodic kind of style books, that's a great skill to have that a lot of people don't have, to be able to go in there and tell a great, 3-issue story and then step out and then just jump back in whenever it's needed. So yeah. I would definitely recommend checking out Tom's issues if you have not, and his stuff is really fantastic.
I agree with you, Tatiana. I told people last year to go buy Rainey art. Oh, I'm up. Well, I knew I was going to hit Larry with the 3rd best artist in his family for Andy Kubert, so I had to pick the Kubert that's better and go with Adam. I actually am a much bigger fan of Adam Kubert's art than Andy Kubert's art. I have a bunch of examples in my collection, ranging from his early work on the Weapon X Wolverine Age of Apocalypse book up to current stuff now. I just think Adam has his own style, right? I never saw the influences of his father or Lee like I see in Andy's. And I like Andy's. I'm not bashing him, but I thought that it was just appropriate because Adam had a run on both regular X-Men and Uncanny. So I thought we needed to give him a little love. You can see it in that bottom panel on the left-hand example that Larry picked here. Like I said, his style is unique, and it brings so much to the issues he works on.
All right. And lastly, I have Carlos Pacheco. So, Carlos came pretty much soon after Andy Kubert's run. And by that time, Marvel was bankrupt and on life support. But I thought Carlos actually had a longer run than I remembered. But he only did like 13 issues, and that was very. I mean, so he only spent like a year on it. I remember it was longer than that, but there weren't very many great stories there. But I do remember the story with Shang-Chi. But I also remember, I mean, Carlos's style at this time. I mean, it was very different. And it kind of grew on me because this is such a big difference from going from Andy Kubert to this early Pacheco art. And Carlos's art is very different now. But back then he had a very unique style. I mean, just look at Shang-Chi's fingers. I mean, this was an interesting period for the X-Men. But I felt, to me, Carlos made an impression with me, even though it was a short run and he didn't have very many good stories. I mean, I forgot what that crossover was with Bastion, but that was such a great crossover series. Yeah, Carlos Pacheco is my honorable mention. So,
all right, good picks by all. And very debatable. Now, back on that one slide, how many unique artists did we vote for? Was it 11? I can't recall.
I think
That was.
So, yeah, it was 11. It was 11.
I mean, I think that's just interesting at the end of the day too. I mean, that just shows you that we really aren't that different. Although, like Tatiana's votes are very different than mine. At the end of the day, that's. There's a lot of consistency in what our top picks are, I'd say. So aside from leaving Jack Kirby off the list, I know everybody. So
it's interesting, Bill. If you and I were to do like a list of illustration artists, I bet you our list would be a lot more similar.
Yeah, no, I agree. I do agree about that. No love for Don Heck. He always gets overlooked, whatever he does. That is true, Alberto. Sadly, very true.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, this was really good. Larry and Jason, I'm so glad that you guys were like, let's debate this. I mean, we've needed a chat like this to fill the void after Collect Conversations. It has been on hiatus for the last several months, and this was a really great approach to us having a fun debate that sparked a lot of debate in the chat. I'll be really curious to see after the show. The comment, I get an email to report by the system that monitors every show that we do, and it'll kind of give me a breakdown on the number of people who participated and how many comments were made. So I think this is a really great format and something that we can build upon. And as Tatiana mentioned in the chat, she's up for moderating a Batman panel, so I think that would be very interesting as well. And I saw Stanley even ask that we could do a poll during the chat. That is something that we can do. So if we put a little planning like we did with this talk into future chats, I think we can make them a lot more engaging, and everybody can be involved with it a bit more. And this is a really good approach to doing these. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and I know not everybody would agree with some of the rankings that we had, but we had 4 different people, and we all of us ranked them differently. I mean, me and Jason love the same eras, but we had completely different rankings, and I think that's pretty cool. I mean, so we could choose a different 4 people. Okay, yeah, maybe Jack Kirby might show up, but I think this list is pretty representative. I mean,
I can tell you guys, this seems easy. It's not easy. Mm-hmm. Trying to get that who's 4, who's 5, who's 6, who's 7 was, at least for me. I mean, I don't know about the other 3 guys, 3 people on the panel, but when you really, it's easy. Like, this all came from Bill shooting from the hip during a weekly update saying these are my top 5 artists, and his list changed when he started to think about it and really look at it. And there's so many different ways to look at it. Like, how do you divorce the art from the story, right? I couldn't do that. So yes, there was a lot of nostalgia in it, but I tried to build some parameters around it, and the other guys did it the same but different, and we came up with different lists, and it came out to be a great conversation. So
exactly. And like Dino said, he's going to pull out his X books and reread some of them just to see how they do stack up. And I would say, if we did a panel on Fantastic Four art, Kirby would be in my top 5 without question. I'm sure he'd be in many people's top 5 for that title.
He'd be in my top 2. Right? So.
Top 2, right? I mean, exactly. I mean, I can kind of picture it too. He wouldn't be number 5. He would definitely be right up near the top.
Yeah.
Would he be right on that Kubert for you, Larry, for Fantastic Four too? Andy Kubert, Jack Kirby.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, Salvador LaRocca is number 1. Yeah. So.
Oh man. Well, listen, I'm so glad we did this, and I'm so glad we got the participation in the chat. We had over 100 people watching at its peak, so that's a good turnout for a Monday evening chat.
That's awesome.
I think we've got a good thing here. So appreciate it, everybody, and Tatiana, Larry, Jason. Appreciate your contributions into this, and for including me in it as well. I mean, I got to feel like I was kind of a spectator in all this. Larry did all the heavy lifting, putting all this.
Larry did all the heavy lifting here. Yep.
Pulled together all of our submissions and put the slide presentation together, and yep. So thank you very much, Larry.
I mean, like I said, I was looking forward to this for like weeks. So I'm glad you agreed to do this, Bill.
Well, my pleasure. So, all right, well, it's we're an hour or 2 hours and 15 minutes into the show. So I'm going to call it a night. But again, thank you to my panelists. Thank you to everybody who was in the chat this evening. And have a wonderful evening. And I can't tell you what the next topic will be, but it probably will be Batman, since Tatiana's volunteered already. So if you would like to be on a panel with Tatiana to talk about your top 5 Batman artists, I would hit her up with an email. Let her know what that you'd like to be on the list. And I don't know if capping it at 4 is the right. 4 feels like a good number. So so she'll pick 3 people, and then they'll join her, and we'll get it on the schedule.
Get Bob McGann on that, because I want to skewer his choices.
He's got to be on a future panel of any kind, that's for sure.
He's a big Batman guy. He'll fit there perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's some real big Batman collectors out there who I think would just be amazing for that panel. So I think we'll get a really good group together.
All right, cool. All right, well, I'm calling it a night. Thank you, everybody. And I'll be on tomorrow night with Mr. Redjack. I've got Mr. Redjack as my interview guest tomorrow evening. So that should be a lot of fun. And I got a full slate this week too, but I'm looking forward to talking to him, because he's been in the chat all the time, cheering you guys on just as much as Nick Perucci cheers you on. So tune in tomorrow and cheer him on, so you get the butterflies out of his stomach when we're talking about his art collection. And all right, so I'm ending the broadcast.